Is the Nikon D700 still a viable camera today in 2025? Let's find out. So the Nikon D700 is a full-frame camera from 2008, 2009. It has a 12 megapixel sensor, and it honestly, it's getting pretty dated by now. And I know there's a lot of fans out there who absolutely love the camera, but as a professional using it, it is getting dated. The dynamic range isn't as good as some of the latest technology out there, and for a lot of you, I know that's going to be a problem. So if you are somebody who is shooting to get a lot of dynamic range, I would avoid the camera almost completely. Now, autofocus is pretty fast, so you're not going to have to worry about that. It only shoots about 4 to 5 frames a second. So if you're a sports photographer, that might limit you a little bit depending on your shooting style. But for most people, it'd be fine. And really, it's a heavy camera. So I would avoid using it if you're somebody who needs to have a lighter setup. Now, the thing I want to bring up about the Nikon D700 is that it does have a cult following. So a lot of people will be telling you it's still one of the best cameras out there today. But as a professional who works in the commercial space, the wedding space, and a few other places, I'm going to tell you it is limiting. So the dynamic range is pretty low. You can recover the shadows quite well, but you can't really recover the highlights. This camera is a little older now, is getting quite heavy compared to all the other cameras on the market. I don't know if it really stands up to what Nikon is putting out, what Canon has put out, what Sony's been putting out. So it's one that I'm going to have to say would need a lot of convincing to use professionally. The 12 megapixels limits it quite a bit, and really I think 24 megapixels is what you're going to need for most jobs. So for that reason, professionally, I wouldn't use it. However, that doesn't mean it's not a buy. For those of you who want to get into the full frame system and want something to really just experiment with it, grow, and have an amazing portfolio online, it's still worth it. And here's the reasons why.
So these are some examples of images that I had taken with the Nikon D700. And this has been over many years of using this camera. I've also compiled some that are wedding shots, some shots of portraits and landscapes, and then I've also included a few shots that will show you how the highlights recover and a few other things with this camera. Now, when watching this and watching me kind of go through this and edit some of these images, I want you to pay attention to a few key things. The first is the highlights. You'll notice that the highlights don't really recover as well as modern cameras do, but that's okay. This is a camera from 2009 after all. I wouldn't really expect it to recover as well as the modern cameras do today. The other thing I would pay attention to is how much grain comes into the shadows. There isn't a lot, but cameras nowadays do handle a lot more kind of post-processing on the other end. Now, this image that you see in front of you right now, that I'm going to start editing in a second. This image is from when I was exploring a few buildings, and we found this amazing graffiti wall that I just needed to take a picture of. So the person that I was with, I had them stand in front of the wall, and I took the picture. As is, this is the raw file and the colors you see right out of camera, so it's not bad at all. They're definitely very gorgeous colors, and I would say it doesn't need a whole heck of a lot of post-processing to make this image look great, but I wanted to go for a style here where the person just kind of blends into the foreground, and I just kind of affect the shadows a little bit more than I probably should have in this shot. But this is me just kind of playing around with white balance, and exposure settings for a little bit here, because I want her to disappear. Now the image itself, it's probably one of the better images, and I probably get more compliments on this image than I do most others in my portfolio. But like I said, it's kind of one of those that took a little bit of work to get to where I wanted it to. And you can see that it's pretty easy to oversaturate the images on this file, just because the images are, well, the image is already pretty saturated as is. Now with this image, I needed to crop it a little bit because it was a little larger than I wanted, and it was showing too much of the ceiling. And it was also showing a little bit too much of the foreground. I wanted to make the subject in the middle of the frame kind of the bigger and larger space to kind of look at, because I wanted that wall to stand out a little bit more. Normally, I probably wouldn't have cropped it in this much, but it kind of works a little bit more in my opinion. And I really liked the contrast I was getting out of it. And you'll see in here that I kind of want the highlights to be a little bit brighter. And to me, that adds a little bit more dynamics to this image. But with the D700, if you were to try to recover those highlights, it just wouldn't be possible. So I decided to make them stand out a little bit more here. And of course, we're going to add a little bit of a gradient just to make sure she disappears into the bottom of the image a little bit more. And some of that debris kind of disappears into shadow. Now, the original version of this edit is not like this, but this is what I wanted to do with it recently, and I think it looks pretty good, and she's very sharp in the center. So now with the colors in this image, they're a little too vibrant for me and a little too saturated in some areas, and in other colors not saturated enough. So I just kind of adjust them a little bit here. And sometimes I'm changing the luminance and the hues as well. So we'll see how that kind of affects the image, and then we'll make a decision as we kind of edit. And I think the reds needed to be brought up a little bit, just so then that way they were a little brighter, because it wasn't really a pleasing red in my opinion. And now the saturation goes down just a little bit to kind of make it the same saturation level as the rest of the image. And it turns out really well. And then we're playing with the yellows and the oranges, just because a lot of the image here is yellows and oranges. And the oranges are going to affect the pipes and the rusty areas and some of the yellows, but the yellows are only going to affect things that are actually really yellow in this image. So just pay attention when you're editing your images to make sure that you're paying attention to what is actually being affected in the image. And of course, you can't have this image without a little bit of a vignette. I wanted to really pull out that wall and make it stand out. And yes, I do feather it quite a bit when I do a vignette, just because if you don't feather it, then it could have just that too much of a vignette look to where it just doesn't look very pleasing to most people's eyes. It has a hard edge. But this here, it really pulls out the wall and brings you like into the scene a little bit more, if you ask me. And this image here is from a car show. As you'll see, there's Buzz Lightyear and Woody on the top of the car, holding on for dear life. But yeah, so this is a image I took just because I thought, oh, you know what, that was pretty cool. It is backlit. So this is where you're going to have a little bit of problems with the D700, but there's a few ways to get around it. The colors, as you can see, are still relatively there. They're not so desaturated that I'd have to worry too much, but I did want to at least make it a little bit warmer of an image. And as you can see, this is about as much as I could do for highlight recovery. There's a big gap there which I can't recover because of the sun, and for some people that's a problem, and others it's not. For this image, I don't think it's much of a problem because I don't need much of the sky. All I need to do is just make sure my saturation is good, my contrast is good, and I have a half decent sky to play around with, and then I can kind of do the rest from there and make the image stand out a little bit more. My idea here was to make it a little bit of a darker image where Buzz and Woody are. and then kind of bring back some of the brightness if I needed to, but they still needed to be in shadow. So I needed to make sure they weren't the brightest thing in the frame either. And now playing with colors also adds a lot to the image, where you can just slightly change up some of the colors and it can affect quite a bit of the mood. And with this as well, I'm going to add in a little bit of a radial filter where I can at least cover some more of the sunlight, figure out how contrasty I want it to be, and kind of add almost like a little bit of a flare effect as well. So these are some of the things that you can kind of do to get away with the dynamic range issues on the camera. And it does help a lot when you've decided to pick up a camera like this that's older. You should have a few editing tricks to kind of get over some of the downsides. You should also learn how to use lighting, which obviously I didn't have at the time, but that will help mitigate some of the negative sides of this camera, is just using lighting in certain situations. Even a reflector would help a lot to bounce back some of the light into the shadow so you don't have to recover as much. And then you could play around with the shadow detail, and you could play around with everything else afterwards. And now you can see I'm just adding a mask here to kind of brighten them up a little bit more, because I want them to be a little bit brighter but still in the shadows. And then add in some contrast and raise the shadows a little bit. And then I believe the blacks are gonna get crushed a little bit more here in a second. And it's currently working on the sky, so I can get the sky at least to a point where I'm happy with it. Because again, that whole right side where it's half just pure bright, it's not really doing the image much good. You can kind of bring it down a little bit and then get right into where you need to be. And it didn't really need much to kind of get it to where I wanted it. Now, this image here, at least we'll put a little bit of the camera to a test. We have this gazebo with the stairs on the right-hand side. This is in Victoria Park in Truro, Nova Scotia. And the highlights here are going to be a bit of a problem, because if you could see the sky, it's completely blown out. You can recover quite a bit of it, as I've shown you, but you can't recover as much as you would need to if you wanted to get the sky nice and blue, as well as getting all the clouds in there. So there's a few tricks you kind of have to do in editing. And I want to just make sure that everything is pretty close to evenly exposed in this image. And it's going to be a little hard to do with this image just simply because of the sky. And I think that's what most people are going to find when using this camera, is the sky is going to be blown out more times than it's not, especially with subjects in the shadow. But as you can see, we were able to recover the highlights fairly well. The sky looks pretty gray, and the shadows look pretty well as well. So you're able to do a lot, just probably not as much as you'd think. And now we have to find a way to make the sky look a little bit better. So we're playing with some of the luminance and saturation of the sky to kind of get it into a place where we think it's all right. And we were able to get it this far, so it looks much better than when it started. But now I would say we're going to add a little bit of vignette here and fix some of the spots where we would have some sort of chromatic aberration or some other color issues with this lens, because I do know there is quite a bit with this lens. And the vignette kind of, again, helps you get drawn into the gazebo and the rest of the image. This one is probably a little bit too much, and we probably didn't need to go that dark. I probably needed to be a little bit lighter here. But again, I'm just showing you guys what you can do with this camera and where you can kind of go with it. Now, I picked this image on purpose, and yes, this was purposely shot high key, so that some of him would be blown out and some of the background would be blown out. This is just kind of what I wanted to do with the image. But we're going to try to recover as much as we can with it, and you can recover quite a bit. There's enough skin detail and color detail in here that you can recover it while still having highlights. And as you can kind of see, there is a lot that's lost in this image, but that was the plan with it. So we're going to kind of show you as well how far you can recover the shadows and it still looks pretty good. And the grain up in the corner, really, there isn't much there. It's there, but it's not as bad as I would have thought. Now, I want this image to be right around here because this is where I'm going to start playing with it. And again, I wanted to shoot it a little bit more high key, but we're going to add a little bit more contrast into it. We're going to add a little bit of yellows into there because I want to make sure that the temperature is nice in this image and the skin tones look good. People have yellowish peachy skin, so you want to make sure that you kind of have that correct as well. And really, here I would probably leave it if I decided I was done, but I wanted to correct some of the green and purplish hues that you see on the edges when you're using prime lenses. Or even beginner lenses, because it just doesn't look good in images, so you want to get rid of that. But this image is pretty much done, and you can do whatever you want with it, like add a vignette again. I love a little bit of a vignette, but this is again a little too strong, and we want to feather everything out, and I wanted to make sure everything was done, but this was the style that I had delivered at the time.
So for me, if you were a hobbyist or looking to pick one up for your collection, it's certainly a yes. If you are somebody who's looking for, let's say, a professional camera to go take out on weddings and everything else, I think you can do better at this point. And I think there's cameras out there that are much, much better, even in that same price range. The Nikon D800 is in that price range at this point, and you get 30 some odd megapixels, a better autofocusing system, and better dynamic range. And honestly, I would pick that over the D700 any day.